A patch just dropped in Marvel Snap. That means it's time to take a look at the data mines and look ahead to see what insane cards they're cooking up. Luckily for us, there is a massive season awaiting us in this video. It is the new X-Men season, and it looks like there's going to be 8 cards in it at least. First up is Prodigy, a 3/4 that says if this card is in the back row, copy the text of the card in front of it. Now, by the time this season rolls around, it will be after What If season, which is next month, which appears to be the season that is introducing the back row, front row mechanic. But I suspect it refers to exactly what it seems to refer to, which is there are 2 spots in the front of the row at a location and in 2 spots in the back, right? So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. This is going to copy something in 3/4 that is in whatever is in front of it. That seems really interesting. If it was just copying your cards from the back row into the front row, I think that would probably be like a pretty mediocre card that wouldn't be worth printing. Maybe this would make sense with that functionality if this is like a Series 4 card or like a free card from a game mode or something like that. Like if this is the Gorgon of the month, that would make sense a little bit. But when I look at this card, I just genuinely like the range is so large on this guy. This is the biggest question mark I have seen in all of my years doing data mines, not just because we're not sure how it'll work, but if it works the way I think, it'll be even weirder. And if it doesn't work the way I think, it'll be probably pretty terrible. There's like a really specific genre of cards in Marvel Snap that don't always see the greatest amount of play, but really are popular and sort of get people's brain juices flowing in a good way. And I think Elixir is the newest in a line of those. This is a really interesting card. Like, first things first, there is something to be said about just having an Elixir on the board and then playing an Arnim Zola game plan, right? That does effectively give you multiple targets. However, it's not ever going to actually be in the lane that the Arnim Zola is in, so it's only ever going to double up on one of the other lanes, because if it's in the lane the Arnim Zola is in, you just copy this, or you run a chance of a 50-50. So what else can this guy do? Well, you can eat a big guy with Venom and then get a second copy of it as like a pseudo Arnim Zola. You can do stuff like Misery, maybe, if you're interested in that, but it's likely by that point Firehair will be a better solution for copying the kind of things you'd want to copy with Misery. So is this a Phoenix Force card? Are we bringing stuff back in the actual Destroy deck? I tend to think this card doesn't want to go in Destroy itself, because Destroy itself is so full of cards that don't actually get destroyed when they die. You have like Wolverine and X-23 and Deadpool. These cards don't die. They don't go to the graveyard. They just replace the going to the graveyard with coming back to life, basically. So you're not ever getting them back. What this also could do is like be a sort of Shang-Chi prophylactic, which is really interesting. Like you just have this activated. Your opponent has a priority. Your opponent doesn't have priority, so they're going to Shang-Chi something. Having this guy just be like, actually, you're not going to get to Shang-Chi something, that I think might end up being the most likely outcome for this guy, but that requires you to be really all in on Shang-Chi type stuff. Like, this is the kind of thing where it's like, maybe you run this in like a Scar deck where you're like, if I get Shang-Chi'd, I just lose. Maybe you run this in like whatever other deck that cares about that. You got to care a lot about keeping your 10s alive to do that, because otherwise, you probably wouldn't want to play a 1/1 to solve that problem. So I'm trying to figure out what problem this guy solves that no other card solves. He's a very specific thing, and I can't exactly figure out how to use him offensively outside of like some oddities with Phoenix Force, right? Like, okay, let's say you get your Phoenix Force combo off, and then you go Venom a Phoenix Force, and then you bring back the Phoenix Force with Elixir. That kind of stuff seems pretty sick. Like, I kind of expect there to be some sort of weird intensifier that this guy can serve as in some sort of destroy-based combo deck. I can see him existing in a Scar deck, just like a cheap option here, but it should not be discounted how bad the cube rate on an activate card is compared to a card that actually has an effect the turn it comes down. This guy is not going to save you if you draw him on turn 6. He's not going to save you if you can't play him before turn 6. he's only ever going to save you if he is face up on the board, which means that there's no surprise value in him, so if your opponent is dead to him, they're just gonna leave. This is one of the cleverest designs I think they've ever legitimately done. I need to give you a little bit of background on New X-Men, which was one of 2 comic book, like, omnibuy that I owned as a, I guess, child/teenager. The other one was like a 70s Spider-Man in black and white. And then there was just like this random segment of New X-Men that I read that I had. I don't even know why. It was just like 7 issues or something of New X-Men. And this character, Xorn, was like this sort of mystical teacher type guy for the special class, which is like all the X-Men mutants who like didn't actually have good powers. It was just everyone whose powers sucked. And so this guy was like the teacher of that class. And then later on, it is revealed that he is Magneto. And then later on, that gets retconned and he's not actually Magneto. But the point is, this guy's design being a riff on what Magneto does is genuinely some really clever stuff. Like, that is like, I see what you did there. I like it. I like what you're cooking. As far as this being a playable card, I don't know, because, like, if you're using it in your move deck, it's like, okay, you got your Vulture synergy or whatever, right? But it's not really doing all that, right? Like, it's like, okay, I probably have better options if my goal is big Vulture than I do this, right? Like, that's kind of just like a bad Hercules. So is this able to be used defensively? Are you able to, like, use this as a, like, hey, my opponent is playing a lot of 4-drops, I'm just going to put this here and they won't be able to do that anymore? Is this like a sort of clog type thing? My instinct is this guy's a little too weak to see play, but at 2-3, maybe he's just not. Like, maybe this is just a fine include as a disruptive tool against any deck that plays 3s and 4s, and just be like, yeah, those don't actually go here anymore. That's actually really hard to do. Like, Asteroid M is a pretty disruptive location against a lot of decks, and this is effectively kind of a better Asteroid M, because it's much harder to fill up 2 locations and prevent your stuff moving out. Like, this is the kind of card where it's like, I can see this being genuinely problematic in some sort of mid-range worlds. Obviously, it is like total doggy-doo in a world where people are like playing Hella or whatever. You just don't care about this card existing at all. But there are mid-range games where it's like, this could be a meaningfully disruptive card. On the whole, this feels a little bit more like a Gorgon tier card than it does like a card I'd be willing to pay for. But as a Gorgon tier card, it is far more interesting than actual Gorgon. This is another character I remember from the omnibus that I read. His character arc was, if I recall, it was him getting addicted to a drug that increased his mutant psychic abilities and then dyeing his hair that color. His hair was not always that color. It is like an affectation. He like dyes his hair that color and like shaves it down the sides, and he starts saying Magneto was right a lot. It was like a whole thing. They were trying to make a commentary on something, presumably. Anyway, this is Quentin Quire, Kid Omega, and he is a shockingly exciting card. Like, this is a really good effect. This is reverse Venom, effectively. About 3 months ago, I had Binks on 8 cubes, and one of the things he brought up was, I think that he thinks that what Destroy needs to be a good deck again is a second Venom. And it's hard to come up with how to do a second Venom. And this is a really strong second Venom. This is like a legitimately powerful option for a pure Destroy deck that is going to be very, very unique and interesting. Destroying the next card you play on an activate ability to add its power to Kid Omega is kind of exactly what you want, just like a timed destroy. You're scaling up your Deadpool, boom, you actually get a free extra destroy. This guy only costs 2, that's awesome. I'm really excited for what he can do in Destroy decks. I do wonder if he can do stuff outside of Destroy decks. Like, again, second Venom, right? Are we interested in this guy in Phoenix Force decks? What else are we going to be able to do with dead stuff, right? They seem to be sort of focusing in on Banish as a mechanic, right? So maybe we'll get more ways to revive things in the future. Maybe we'll have a greater need for targeted destruction. And in a world where we have any kind of need for targeted destruction, this is the guy for that. Like, this is absolutely 100% the guy for targeted destruction. And that is a really interesting role to have, because I think in a world like that, in a world where we're Phoenix Force type stuffing with this guy, he's actually better than Venom. And so, like, you have this, you have, like, for example, you can play this guy, you can play Shuri, you can activate him and then play your 12 power Nimrod. Like, that's awesome. This is, like, a really powerful dude. I expect this guy to be, like, the kind of card that you are never going to be sad to own ever. A lot of people have been looking at this and saying, oh, that's cloaks text. It's just a placeholder text. Oh, it's a 5/8 cloaks. Okay, here's the thing. It's not a 5/8 that cloaks. It's a 5/8 that cloaks for you only. And I kind of think this card is a little bit busted. A 5/8 that lets you rearrange everything and your opponent do nothing. I mean, like, 5/8 is like kind of like bang on the definitional spot of like, this is a good utility card. And you have the ability, like, moving stuff around is messed up. Like, it's just a very powerful thing. You unclog yourself. This is a one-sided version of that location that everyone absolutely despises that lets both players move on turn 6. This is really strong. Like, this is a very powerful card that I think is legitimately a really scary opportunity for a lot of mid-range decks. There are going to be decks that don't care about this. There's going to be metas that don't care about this, right? Like, Legion isn't playable in every deck or in every metagame because it's only a 5/7, and there's going to be plenty of games where you just don't care about that at all. This guy looks to me like, if I had to put a word on what this guy is, I would describe him as like better Legion, because of the ways in which he sort of frees you up from a variety of different bad situations depending on how it goes, because of the fact that he's going to be applicable almost all of the time. Like, the only way this card could be better is if he like let you move stuff away from the location he was played at. Like this is just a strong ass card. Like, there's really nothing else to say about it. Like, this is a mid-range god level 5-drop, just a really good card. And this is the answer to all of my prayers. Mercury, a 2/2 that can move once and says ongoing enemy cards here can't move. This does two things. First, I finally get a 2-drop that I can just play in whatever deck to deal with whatever move, bounce, Madam Web BS is happening. Second, this is really powerful with Professor X and Cannonball, right? Like, you have the ability. It says enemy cards here can't move. You're not going to be able to put it in the Professor X lane and prevent things from moving into the Professor X lane like that. But you can put it in another lane and prevent Cannonball from kicking things into the Professor X lane. That works. You can also play this and just have Cannonball always blow up the thing instead of moving it. So having this does sort of bring back Prof X Cannonball, which I think is, I don't know, like, is that the worst thing of all time? Like, if it is now a 3-card combo instead of a 2-card combo, how much worse is it? That is, I think, the question that has to be asked and answered here. My instinct is that it will be a powerful combination of cards. These 3 cards together will be strong, but it might not be like, whoa, oh my god, I'm instantly dead. On the other hand, the addition of Luna Snow has actually given us more ways of getting early Prof X out since the last time that this was a legitimate thing. So I am sort of wondering if, like, maybe we can go all the way back to the well on, like, turn 4 Prof X stuff and then use this in Cannonball to lock up the rest of the game. Maybe it is possible. Surge is a 2/2 with an on-reveal ability that gives the top card of your deck -1 cost and +1 power, and then if you play that card, the ability happens again. I can't tell if this card is good or bad. My instinct is that it's not very good because I find it hard to come up with a deck that will allow me to just play off the top of the deck without actually regarding the context of the actual game. I feel like this card is exciting and cool in the way Phastos is, and that's kind of the comparison I want to draw, where it's like, this feels like a Phastos type card where there is a lot of appeal in it, but ultimately not a lot of hard power in it. And I think a lot of that is because, in my view, the community overrates -1 cost pretty significantly, because it's like, what are you going to do with that -1 cost? Are you going to be able to make the best plays with that -1 cost? How are you deck building for that -1 cost? And when you look at something like Sarah, the way in which it answers those questions is by playing the highest impact tech cards and the cheapest big cards in the entire game, because that's how it wants to do that -1 cost. But that is dependent on actually having targets for those things, which is why it is a Sarah deck that is able to play those cards on the final turn of the game, knowing that they will be hitting things. This is not doing the same thing, and I frankly think that +1 power is not enough to offset the lack of targeting. I don't know exactly what this card is telling me to do as a deck, but I don't think it's anything that has ever been good in Marvel Snap before. So that means that this card is going to have to sort of carry the weight, and I don't think the numbers on it are strong enough to carry the weight of a deck like this. I could be wrong, but it looks to me, this card, Fastos vibes. Esme Cuckoo, a on reveal 3/4 that copies a card from your deck, puts it into your hand, and makes it a 3/4. That is, again, this is really sick flavor. First of all, similar ability to White Queen. Esme is one of 5, I want to say, members of what they call the Stepford Cuckoos. They are like 5 psychically linked clones of White Queen or something to that effect. They dress like her, I can tell you that much. And they all have various levels of psychic abilities, that mind reading, things like that. This is her using her psychic abilities. And also, and I think this is crucial, making the cards she copies conform with her, be part of the in-group. Like, that's what their characters are about. I think that's just a really sick little move from them. Like, that's just like, all right, you did some actual reading and cooking here. Like, just based on my unfortunately limited memories of this is like a really sick design. It also might be really good. Like, again, we have a lot of decks right now where it's like, oh, I'm gonna gore mystique you. This is a really strong way to gore mystique people. We've seen setting stuff to 4 be really, 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 really relevant in the previous Agent Venom era of decks. And we've seen even setting it a little bit less be a lot less relevant. But if you put this in like those old Agent Venom decks, or it's just like any kind of card in the deck is going to punch above its energy cost, and then there's also like Iron Man Claw or whatever, that seems legitimately quite frightening, where like this is a really interesting and powerful card that I think has some of the most potential, like this side of Prodigy, that I've seen in a long time. Obviously, the nightmare for me is like this card becomes like a thing that just like lets people copy gore all of the time, or a consistency piece for combo decks, because those are like typically my least favorite things to happen in Marvel Snap games. But this is a really, really legitimately unique card that is going to provide a dynamic that I think a lot of people don't like, which is snaps with no knowledge and losing to things you had no idea of the ability to play around. And I think Esme is going to have a lot of that in her, which will make her a fairly powerful card if she picks up, because of that inherent information asymmetry in the card. All right, y'all, thank you so much for sticking with me through this Datamined video. I'm pretty excited for some of these cards. Like, there are some really interesting ones in there. I do think that the easiest one to call strong is Mr. 5/8, everything can move kind of deal. That's a really obviously good card in a lot of different metagames, like the ones that we've had recently. But there are some really interesting cards in Esme, Cuckoo, and Prodigy that have like wide error bars on them, I think, that I think could be really exciting as well. Which of these is your favorite? Which of these are you the most excited for? As always, I read every comment. I have been KMBest. You have been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one.